1 Samuel chapter 5 is one of the shortest chapters in the book of Samuel, but it's also one of the most memorable. The Philistines, though victorious in battle, just can't seem to catch a break once they take possession of the Ark of the Covenant. The problem is, they think the Ark of the Covenant operates just like every other ark in the ancient world. That is, they think that it's kind of like a magic charm. But that's simply not the case. After initially setting up the Ark of the Covenant up in Ashdod, they play a bit of moving chairs, moving the Ark next to Gath and then to Ekron, which are all Philistine cities. But as we'll learn in the chapters that will unfold, this is not going to be the final resting place for such an important artifact, and it's going to find a more suitable home. For our purposes, there are two items that I want to draw your attention to in this chapter. The first is unpacking Yahweh's name and qualities, and the second is understanding more the rivalry between Yahweh and Dagon. So, let's get started. The first point I want to draw your attention to in this chapter is the name and the qualities of Yahweh. As we know, Yahweh is the unique name of God among the Hebrew people. There's not really a great consensus about the exact meaning of the name, but there are several options. One of them is something like He will be what He will be, or the one who is, or just in Hebrew, the name is Yahweh. The name should be a reminder that Yahweh actually doesn't want a special name, in part because knowing the name of an entity implies that you have some kind of power or authority over it. This obviously is not going to work for Yahweh nor the theology of the Old Testament. Yahweh is an all-powerful God. Yahweh pounces over rival demigods, so He surely isn't going to be overpowered by mere mortals. Yahweh essentially gives this name Yahweh or Yahweh, which, by the way, it's incorrectly pronounced as Jehovah. What this name does is it serves as a sort of holding place for the name of God, and this is when Moses is going to appear before God at the burning bush, and he's going to ask, well, what kind of God, or what is the name of the God who wants to send me into Egypt to rescue the Israelites? This is when God says Yahweh is going to be that name. That is, it's the God of all of the ancestors of the Hebrew people, beginning with Abraham. The most famous part of this story, when God reveals His name to Moses, which occurs in Exodus chapter 3, is of course the burning bush. And I was excited to be able to travel to Mount Sinai a few years ago, and I hiked Mount Sinai. And yes, just as a way of an aside, you can actually still see the burning bush today, but no, it's still not on fire. What was so unusual about Yahweh is that He did not want the people who worshiped Him to make a carved image or some kind of sculpture of Him. As the second commandment stated, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or a likeness. This was pretty strange in the culture of the ancient Near East, where every god or goddess was portrayed through some kind of image or a sculpture. But coming before this second commandment, of course, is the first commandment, and this is where God says explicitly that you shall have no other gods to rival me. Now, most people today think this passage means something like you should put God first over other selfish desires or personal idols or ambitions, but that's not at all how the original hearers would have understood it. On the contrary, they had just come from living for 400 years in Egypt, which is a land of very powerful gods and goddesses, and of course the Israelites knew these gods that were listed in the book of Exodus were actually talking about real gods and goddesses that were worshipped by the surrounding nations. So this wasn't a mere theoretical exercise, it was very practical because people always made images back then of their gods. And this is explicitly what Yahweh did not want. And so what did Yahweh do to the gods of Egypt? Well, as Exodus says, I, Yahweh, will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. Just as Yahweh judged Egypt's God, so now God, that is Yahweh, is judging the gods of the Philistines. And this takes us to the second item that I want to highlight in chapter 4. Understanding the rivalry between Yahweh and Dagon. The Philistines actually had several major gods, but the one mentioned in this story was Dagon. We don't know as much about this god as we would like to, but there have been several educated guesses. This god is traditionally depicted as having the upper body or torso of a man and the lower body or torso of a fish. Although this may sound strange to you, it was very normal in the ancient world, and even in many world religions today, like Hinduism or Buddhism, you'll often see gods and goddesses who are portrayed with similar kinds of features. Because of the traditional depiction of Dagon, this has led some people to think that he was a fish god, but it's probably more likely that his name has more to do with the Ugaritic or Akkadian word for grain, meaning that he would be the god of agriculture, which of course was hugely important in a society that lived before the manufacturing of processed food. No grain equals no existence, so Dagon was a pretty big deal. Whatever his name means exactly, Dagon is a very ancient god, and we actually have documents about him from thousands of years ago. He was a powerful ancient Near Eastern deity with lots of temples that were established in order to worship him. In the story at hand, the Philistines have captured the Ark of the Covenant, which of course belonged to Israel and their God, and they set it up in the temple of Dagon. Now, in the biblical tradition, the Ark of the Covenant was understood to be Yahweh's footstool, that is, where he rested his feet as he ruled over the nation. The Ark itself was relatively small, about the size of a large trunk, with two handles that were used to carry it. Atop the chest were two winged creatures called cherubim, and inside there were the Ten Commandments and some other important items. By putting the ark in the temple of Dagon, the Philistines were simply doing exactly what was normal at that time. They were giving the ark to Dagon as a sort of war trophy or a tribute or a sacrifice, but things didn't turn out quite as they expected. That's because Yahweh wasn't a god to be trifled with. He was described in the Bible as a jealous God, so he surely isn't going to tolerate being the lesser of two gods. No, that's just not going to work for Yahweh. This leads us to two somewhat humorous accounts, although I do feel sorry for the people of Philistia since they really don't have a clue what's going on. On the very first night of Yahweh residing with Dagon, Yahweh apparently pushes poor Dagon on the ground with a very clear meaning. Dagon is in the posture of worship. He is worshiping Yahweh, making it clear who is in charge. Now the Philistines, of course, are disturbed by this, and they raise up poor Dagon vertically once more, and they set him in place. The problem is, on the next day, they find him in even a more unfortunate situation. Not only is poor Dagon back on the floor worshiping the real God, Yahweh, Yahweh has gone ahead and decided to cut off both of Dagon's hands and other members of his body. This indicates two things. First, Yahweh has now made Dagon his trophy. And second, it has to do with the phrase that's used several times in this section of 1 Samuel. In chapters 5 and 6, the phrase, "the hand of Yahweh was heavy," is used multiple times. So when Dagon's hands have been chopped off, they show that he's powerless. This also is the first of several beheadings in the book of Samuel. The chapter tells us that Yahweh apparently cut off Dagon's head and he threw his decapitated body on the threshold, barring anyone from entering. This was a huge insult, and the people were confounded. And by the way, the next time someone beheads someone else in the book of Samuel, it's going to be David who is beheading a giant named Goliath. Whatever the case, the whole story of plagues and judgment upon false gods should remind us of the plagues in Egypt, described at length in the book of Exodus, when Yahweh executed judgment on the Egyptian gods and also inflicted the populace with plagues of various sorts. Here too, both the people of Philistia and their main god are judged, and in both accounts it is Yahweh who is clearly in charge. As Exodus states, Yahweh is a warrior, Yahweh is his name. The exploits of this warrior god are just underway in the book of Samuel. And although this chapter has emphasized Yahweh's warrior attributes, this God is also described as very compassionate and very merciful, as we will learn as we continue in the book of 1 Samuel. In the meantime, enjoy your study of 1 Samuel chapter 5.